So back in 2012, wow, does that feel like a time, like an eternity ago? 2012, the era of Gangnam Style. I don't know if you remember. That was a whole different time. We were in the middle of, I believe, yeah, like at the end of Obama's first term, beginning of his second. We were bright and shiny. Everything was possible. Twitter and Tumblr were really active. The Arab Spring had happened on Twitter, and so we were able to see for the first time live posted by people experiencing the situation what was going on in a people's revolution. It was a really wild and wonderful time. I was 22 and all over Tumblr, and these online spaces were wild and raucous and raw, and new social ideas were growing. We were arguing with each other about the right terminology for things. I mean, the transgender ideas were hitting the mainstream, and we were figuring out, like, okay, well, what are the right terms for all of this stuff? And just, arguing with each other, but in a delightful, like, democratic way. We were talking about anti-racism, we were talking about third wave feminism. There were terms that we were figuring out, so like instead of minority, we started using the word marginalized, because minority, it's kind of a passive, it's like, oh, well, they happen to be a smaller group of people, but marginalized instead says there's something at work here that's making this group of people less privileged. They're being marginalized in our society. I also was in my gender studies program, my first master's degree, and so I was learning a lot about identity and global social movements and all this kind of thing. One of the most important concepts I learned during my gender studies program was intersectionality. Now, that's a great $5 word there, but intersectionality, is anyone familiar with this idea? Okay, at least a few folks, that's great. So this term was created by a Black woman named Kimberly Crenshaw to describe the fact that we all have multiple identities that intersect with each other. And when you have multiple marginalized identities, the amount of oppression on you also multiplies. So she was a Black woman, so she experienced racism and sexism, for example. But everyone, whether you're marginalized or not, has multiple identities, right? We all have a gender, we all have a race, we all have ability levels and national identities. And so this really helped me kind of pull apart and look at why exactly certain oppressions were happening. Like, what was, well, if a guy spoke rudely to me on the street, it was probably a gender thing because my race is a little ambiguous. But if I'm trying to go for a job, then my name is spelled a little unusually, and maybe it could be a race thing, that sort of idea. I also learned about figures like James Baldwin. Some of you may have heard of him. There he is, looking just absolutely sassy and wonderful up there with his little cigarette. So James was born in Harlem in 1924. When he was a kid, he loved to go to the library, and he began to preach at his church as a young man. But eventually, he grew to regard the church as both a lifeline and as a source of oppression, because he was both Black and gay. So for his Black community, the church was super important as a community hub. But as a gay man, it made other parts of him not feel welcome. He began writing, and he moved to Paris in his 20s. He published his first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, about those conflicted feelings around faith and church. And this book really resonated with people of all races. He wrote fiction as well as essays on topics like race. He wrote that white people are harmed by racism too, because we are inherently connected in a social tapestry. The FBI, back in the 60s, gathered a lot of files and documents on artists and thinkers, professors, that kind of thing. They gathered almost 2,000 documents on Baldwin, far more than the files of other artists at the time. So he must have been doing something that they were a little worried about. He wrote, "It comes as a great shock that around the age of 6 or 7, to discover the flag to which you have pledged allegiance, along with everybody else, has not pledged allegiance to you." Baldwin experienced firsthand that though he loved his country and loved his community, sometimes there were parts of him that weren't welcome. Recently, you may have heard similar stuff going on with our new administration. A lot has been going on. We'd be here all day if I tried to talk about all of it. But the thing that really got my goat this week was the DEI program thing. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, DEI programs are, DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these programs are meant to level the playing field for folks who were previously excluded from certain professional fields or from getting into certain schools, that kind of thing. Because before, it was usually white men who were getting those jobs and those spots in schools, and it was seeking to make things fair. There was a plane crash this past week, you may have heard. A helicopter and a plane crashed into each other, which was very tragic. I believe 67 people passed away. And our returning president said, with no evidence, that it was because of DEI hires. I literally can't even. Well, not only was there no evidence about the identities of anyone involved, or that DEI hires had played a role, but he's implying that if people of color or women or someone with a disability was involved, that they must be less competent, and so they caused a plane crash. It's wild to assert that, because why would anyone with a marginalized identity want an unfair step into a role that they can't fill? Why would we want to be put into a job that we would fail at and embarrass ourselves and possibly harm people? That's not the point of DEI programs. It's so that competent, skilled people of color and women and other marginalized folks can have a fair shot at the jobs that were previously unfairly prioritized to a certain group. And so that kind of language coming from our leaders is really, really harmful, because it's implying that anyone who has a marginalized identity and works a job is somehow not competent. So it's really setting up, it's just, if any of you have heard the term dog whistle, it's a dog whistle, it's a coded way of saying people of color and women and people with disabilities and so forth are not qualified and can never be qualified. He actually said, let me quote, that we need air traffic controllers who are, quote, the brightest, the smartest, the sharpest, psychologically superior. So I'm just going to go ahead and say I disagree with Mr. President on the fact that anyone is psychologically superior based on their identity. So, our Unitarian Universalist values remind us that there are no psychologically superior groups of people. We don't believe that. It's simply, it doesn't make any sense that based on your race or your gender or some other part of your identity, that you have a certain quality about you. We can go to the next slide, please. Now, people certainly vary in our skills and personality. I'm not arguing with that. That's pretty obvious. But it's not because of parts of our identity. And sometimes when we do see patterns of skill set disparities within geographical locations, it's often because the school systems are funded unequally, because they're funded by property tax values. And neighborhoods, as we all know quite well, are often racially segregated. So it isn't because of the race, it's because of the funding disparities. So that's what the E in DEI seeks to address. And that's what we have in common with our UU values here, equity. Equity and equality are a little bit different. Equality means we're all exactly the same. Equity recognizes that we have had different opportunities, and some of us need a leg up in a way that others don't, to just get to the same level playing field. It seeks to make opportunities equitable to all, since unfortunately our nation is kind of built on an unequal, unequitable way of life. So because I'm talking about politics pretty overtly here, I want to talk briefly about what the limits are on what I and what other church leaders can talk about regarding politics. We may not endorse any particular party or candidate. That's it. That's the limit. We have unlimited rights to preach and advocate about issues. And y'all know I'm gonna preach and advocate about some issues. In Unitarian Universalism and some other denominations, ministers also have what's called freedom of the pulpit. I have that. It's actually in my contract. It reads, "The minister is expected to express personal and faith values, views, and commitments that are consistent with our understanding of our evolving living tradition without fear or favor. The pulpit is free." Now that's powerful, because in a lot of faiths, you're only allowed to say what the Pope says is okay for you to say. We don't have a Pope. I get to say almost whatever I feel is aligned with our values, right? So this may seem bold, but this is a time for boldness. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, because sometimes I'm still new here, sometimes it's a little scary, so I appreciate that. We can be controversial. We can and should criticize those in power. James Baldwin himself wrote, "I love America more than any other country in the world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." Criticizing people in power, criticizing the power structures, is in fact an ancient tradition, with examples like the prophets of the Hebrew Bible, who railed at the kings and war chiefs, telling them loudly that they were out of alignment with their culture's highest values. During our ministerial training, UU ministers-to-be talk about being prophetic in addition to being pastoral. Being prophetic doesn't mean we can tell the future. Wouldn't that be nice? It means loudly pointing out when a culture and its leaders have gone astray. It's come to mean telling the future because the prophets were so often right about what would happen if a nation started being unethical and cruel. Things kind of fall apart. It's actually not hard to be prophetic because it happens over and over again. Faith leaders are taught about being prophetic, so we can hopefully stop history from repeating. But to do so, we need to be challenging in addition to comforting. In our training, we learn about comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. I got a little chuckle from over here. I appreciate that. We learn about speaking truth to power. That phrase, speaking truth to power, was coined by Bayard Rustin. He was born to a Quaker family in Pennsylvania. That's him in the yellow circle there, next to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So Bayard Rustin was born to a Quaker family in Pennsylvania, the Quakers being what I would consider our liberal cousins. He began nonviolently protesting inequality in high school and devoted his life to the art. 10 years before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white person, Bayard Rustin did it and got arrested and beaten. He was jailed for 2 years as a conscientious objector to World War II. His Quaker values taught him that all people contain a spark of the divine, and so all people deserve respect and peace, even those who threaten violence. Rustin visited India to learn about nonviolence from Gandhi's movement and brought the knowledge back to share with the Black civil rights leaders in America, like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Rustin was the key organizer of the famous March on Washington, which was at the time the largest nonviolent protest that had ever happened in the world, at which Dr. King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech, as we heard earlier. You can see him right by Dr. King's side there. But some of their peers actually didn't want him to march in front or stand in such a prominent position because he was also gay. Dr. King himself eventually distanced himself from Rustin due to his sexuality. This is an example of that intersectionality I mentioned earlier. Rustin describes the experience of having multiple marginalized identities as spending time on two crosses. He was an interesting guy, and he had ideas that not all of his peers agreed with. He actually didn't like the idea of like affirmative action programs, so he probably would be okay with DEI going away. Wild, I know that no group of people are completely in agreement about everything. He wanted equality for Black folks, and he disagreed with some others about how to get there. In a healthy democracy, we shouldn't agree on everything all the time. The best ideas come out of debate and disagreement, like when Tumblr and Twitter were raw and before Elon Musk got his hands on it. So here at the beginning of Black History Month, the particular theme of which this year is labor, I want to lift up two gay Black men, because often people with multiple marginalized identities are so often told to wait their turn. Black women, too, have often been told that their concerns are less important than those of their Black brothers or white sisters. Black or transgender women of color, well, you can see how that's going. The more marginalized identities you have, the more at risk you are. And so that's where we really often need to focus our love and our care and our attention, if we have the privilege to do so. Bayard Rustin's race, his sexuality, and his Quaker faith taught him that we can't just work on one front at a time. He knew that these were intertwined issues stemming from a unified cause of supremacy, the idea that one type of person is inherently superior than others. He also knew that if marginalized people and those who care about an equitable world work together, we're much more likely to be effective. So, like the quote at the beginning said, Black folks can't be the only ones working for the rights of Black folks. Gay folks can't be the only ones working for the rights of gay folks. We have to be in it together. And then we really make some things happen, as we have seen in our history. Former President Barack Obama co-produced the film Rustin, a biopic about him. Biopic? I never know how to say that. Former President Obama said this about Bayard Rustin. This reminds us that the fight for justice is typically not just about one group of people or another group of people. It's often in tandem that we have to figure out how to lift up all people. This is one of the ideal beauties of Unitarian Universalism. We bring different people together. Now, we aren't a perfect kumbaya mix of exact quotas of this or that identity, but we are remarkable nonetheless. People of different backgrounds, different beliefs, who can share values and goals. We gather so that our ideas can be tested and grow stronger, so we can learn from each other, so we can work together in the struggle for a world that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive. So let us take inspiration today from James Baldwin and Bayard Rustin. I was so excited to find a picture of them together. That's James on the left and Bayard on the right. Let's take inspiration from them and all those like them who have spent time on more than one cross. Let us bear witness to their different talents, one a writer, the other an organizer, to see how many skills different people need to make a better world. May their work teach us why and how we need to make these transformations, because we have faith that each individual and humanity as a whole has a divine spark, if we would only let it shine.